What happens when your own reflection betrays you in the dark? Looking back at the cold case files from the winter of 2018 in rural Oregon, investigators uncovered a chilling spatial anomaly reported by the victim just hours before his death. The mirrors inside his newly purchased estate did not reflect his movements in real time. Instead, a phantom delay of 2 full seconds twisted his perception of reality, setting off a sinister sequence of psychological terror that ultimately culminated in a brutal homicide. Welcome to the Blackwood Files. I am your host, and tonight, we are examining the death of Arthur Vance. The official reports initially pointed toward a tragic psychological breakdown, blaming isolation and escalating paranoia in the secluded Pacific Northwest woods. But as the case files were reopened, the physical evidence revealed something far more calculated, far more sinister, and entirely man-made. The investigation into Arthur Vance did not begin with a forced entry or a missing wallet. It began with a whispered emergency call reporting a broken reflection. How does a mirror delay a man's image? And more importantly, who stood in the shadows engineering that psychological cage? To find the truth, we had to retrace every step through the freezing Oregon mist, dissecting the silent clues left behind in the dead of night. But before we look at the hidden mechanisms and the offshore financial trails, we need to examine the exact crime scene where the illusion took place. Deep within the dense timberlands of rural Oregon, Pine Ridge Road winds through towering firs that block out the night sky. It was here, inside a secluded modern estate, that Arthur Vance sought refuge from a mounting corporate scandal. Vance was not a man prone to wild imaginations or baseless fears. As a brilliant software engineer, his mind operated on cold logic, systematic verification, and unyielding precision. He spent his days analyzing complex encryption algorithms and building digital fortresses. That exact methodical nature is precisely what makes the initial reports from his estate so disturbing to local investigators. When Vance reached out to local authorities, he was not complaining about a stalker or a break-in. He reported an anomaly that defied his understanding of spatial reality. His own bathroom mirror appeared to reject real-time physics, shifting his reflection by a calculated 2-second lag. To anyone else, it might have sounded like the early signs of exhaustion or psychological isolation in the deep woods. But Vance documented the discrepancy with technical rigor, logging exact timestamps of the visual delay before the situation escalated beyond mere paranoia. The estate itself sat isolated, surrounded by miles of damp underbrush and gravel access tracks, far from any prying neighbors. Yet, as the case files later established, the danger was not coming from the outside world. It was engineered right inside the walls of his own home. The central question remained how a physical mirror could be manipulated to simulate a digital delay without triggering any obvious alarms. At 3:15 in the freezing Oregon morning, local deputies reached the Vance estate and stepped into an unsettling scene of absolute stillness. Arthur Vance was discovered lifeless in his master bathroom, slumped hard against a shattered double-sided vanity mirror that dominated the tiled wall. The preliminary physical evidence pointed immediately to blunt force trauma, matching the jagged fracture lines spreading across the heavy glass surface. Yet, as investigators fanned out through the silent corridors to secure the premises, a deeply troubling technical contradiction emerged. The home security system's central digital hard drive, responsible for logging every perimeter motion sensor and doorway entry, had been physically removed from its secure media bay. There was no sign of a forced exterior breach on any door or window, and every deadbolt remained fully engaged from the inside. How an intruder entered, executed a targeted attack, and vanished without tripping a single perimeter alarm or leaving a trace on the main access logs baffled the responding officers. The missing hard drive suggested inside knowledge of the estate's vulnerabilities, transforming a straightforward homicide investigation into an intricate puzzle of digital deletion and physical manipulation. Every surface inside the master suite was meticulously examined for overlooked traces that might explain the silent breach, while forensic specialists began the grueling task of reconstructing the shattered mirror frame. The position of the fallen victim relative to the vanity setup revealed a struggle that had been carefully contained. leaving no chaotic trail of disturbed furniture in the adjacent hallway. This deliberate containment pointed away from a random crime of opportunity and squarely toward a planned assassination executed by someone intimately familiar with the estate's architecture. Looking closely at the master bathroom vanity, the forensic technicians began dismantling the heavy framed mirror from the tiled wall. The preliminary physical inspection exposed far more than simple surface fractures. Behind the shattered glass lay an intricate wooden framework fitted with a specialized dual-pane optical assembly and a motorized sliding track. This hidden cavity measured precisely 4 inches deep, running the entire span of the double-sink vanity. Investigators realized the bizarre visual anomalies Arthur Vance experienced before his death were not the result of a psychological breakdown or a supernatural occurrence. They were engineered physical illusions created by a sophisticated two-way mirror rig designed to delay reflections and induce acute disorientation. A smudged fingerprint lifted from the concealed aluminum mounting bracket connected the mechanical installation directly to Julian Vance, a security consultant with a history of classified surveillance work. Yet, the physical presence of this complex rig raised an alarming procedural contradiction that troubled the investigative team deeply. The estate's central security logs showed no unauthorized perimeter breaches or system overrides during the precise window when this custom optical assembly must have been physically installed. Someone possessing high-level internal clearance within the corporate circle had evidently granted the consultant unrestricted access to the master suite weeks prior to the homicide. The physical evidence pointed sharply away from a random break-in and straight toward a calculated corporate conspiracy, leaving detectives to determine exactly how the security consultant managed to bypass the perimeter alarms without leaving a single digital footprint on the main system. Deepening the inquiry, investigators interrogated the estate's chief administrator regarding the missing access logs, exposing a corrupted encryption key that masked the unauthorized override while hiding the identity of the internal accomplice. How did a custom architectural alteration go completely unnoticed by the estate's primary contractors? Looking back at the physical layout of the Vance residence, the timeline discrepancy shattered the initial assumption of a spontaneous intrusion. Architectural blueprints recovered from the county clerk's office revealed that the master bathroom mirror cavity was not part of the original structural build. In fact, official construction records showed the false wall framing was installed precisely 3 weeks prior to the homicide. This window directly coincided with a scheduled corporate retreat that left Arthur Vance out of state for 5 consecutive days. Investigators noted that during those exact dates, the mansion's main security console recorded a routine maintenance override under the user credentials of Marcus Sterling, the victim's estranged business partner. But Sterling possessed no background in optical engineering or covert surveillance framing. That missing expertise pointed directly to Julian Vance, the rogue security consultant whose smudged fingerprint remained on the aluminum mounting bracket behind the glass. The physical evidence no longer suggested a random act of corporate espionage or a hasty break-in. It pointed to a premeditated, months-long conspiracy engineered from within the executive circle itself. Yet, as Detective Miller examined the corrupted encryption keys on Arthur's seized laptop, a darker operational question emerged. If the conspirators had complete digital access to disable the perimeter alarms, why rely on a slow, agonizing psychological illusion rather than a swift, silent homicide? The answer lay buried within an encrypted audio file recovered from the study. The audio file recovered from Arthur Vance's study changed the entire scope of the investigation. The recorded sequence captured a muffled exchange between 2 distinct voices inside the house on the night of the homicide. One voice belonged to Arthur, sounding disoriented and erratic as if reacting to the delayed reflection in the custom mirror. The second voice, lower and composed, spoke of encryption keys and offshore wire transfers before abruptly cutting out. Investigators cross-referenced the timeline of the recording with the physical access logs of the estate's perimeter doors. While Marcus Sterling denied ever stepping foot on the property that weekend, financial records told a different story. A series of high-value electronic transfers originating from Sterling's corporate account had been routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The final recipient of those funds was Julian Vance, the rogue security consultant whose technical expertise matched the elaborate two-way mirror rig found in the master bathroom. Yet, despite the compelling paper trail, Julian maintained that he was merely hired to install standard smart home surveillance hardware. He claimed he had no knowledge of how the optics were manipulated to induce psychological terror. As Detective Miller examined the encrypted communication packets left on Julian's seized work server, a hidden digital folder opened automatically. It contained detailed CAD schematics of the bathroom wall cavity, annotated with precise calibration notes that proved the optical delay was engineered with lethal intent. The financial motive was clear, but the operational link between the boardroom and the crime scene remained tied to a single unanswered physical question. The interrogation transcripts from Julian Vance's initial questioning presented a polished wall of plausible deniability. Sitting across from investigators under the harsh fluorescent lights of the county precinct, the rogue security consultant calmly insisted that his digital footprint near the estate was simply part of a routine diagnostic check for the home automation network. He claimed he had never stepped foot inside the master bathroom and knew nothing about the sophisticated two-way optical mirror rig. But Detective Miller refused to take those assertions at face value, knowing that interrogations relied on facts rather than fabricated innocence. A deeper forensic audit of the encrypted files seized from Julian's work server demolished that defense piece by piece. The CAD schematics found in the hidden directory did not just show general blueprints. They contained exact millimeter measurements calibrated specifically to Arthur Vance's vantage point at the vanity. Furthermore, financial investigators traced the offshore wire transfers directly from Marcus Sterling's corporate account into a shell company controlled exclusively by Julian. The paper trail was airtight, revealing a premeditated conspiracy to induce psychological terror and cover up a corporate assassination before federal investigators audited the shared books. Yet, despite the digital and financial collapse of Julian's alibi, the most damning piece of physical evidence was still waiting to be pulled from the bathroom wall cavity. Investigators turned their attention back to the custom mirror frame, searching for the microscopic trace that would permanently shatter the contractor's story and place him squarely at the center of the crime scene. Microscopic carbon fibers recovered from the internal optical track matched the exact synthetic weave of Julian's work jacket, sealing his presence inside the sealed chamber. Looking back at the encrypted drives seized from Arthur Vance's study, Detective Miller realized the physical mirror rig was only half of the puzzle. The real breakthrough came when forensic audio specialists ran a deep spectrum analysis on a background recording captured by Arthur's home automation system on the night of his death. For weeks, the exterior break-in theory had dominated the case files, pointing toward a random intruder slipping through the dark perimeter. But the audio file dismantled that hypothesis completely. Beneath the low hum of the HVAC system, the microphone picked up a distinct second set of footsteps echoing down the hallway, followed by a muffled conversation that carried right through the master bedroom door. These were not the hurried paces of a panicked burglar. They were calm, deliberate footsteps belonging to someone who possessed the security access codes to bypass the estate's outer electronic locks. The voices captured on the recording did not match Arthur, nor did they belong to Marcus Sterling. Instead, the acoustic signature placed at least two individuals inside the house, while Arthur stood paralyzed in front of the optical mirror. This single audio artifact destroyed the narrative of a lone, desperate intruder and firmly established a coordinated corporate conspiracy. The physical evidence was no longer pointing toward an opportunistic crime of passion, but a silent, premeditated execution designed to look like a psychological breakdown. Yet, as investigators examined the background frequencies of the audio track more closely, a faint mechanical click at the very end of the file hinted at an unmentioned device left behind in the dark. That background audio file was not merely a record of footsteps in the dark. It was the acoustic anchor of a cold corporate execution. When investigators cross-referenced the precise timestamps of that muffled hallway conversation with Arthur Vance's local server logs, a much darker reality surfaced. Arthur was not just an eccentric engineer tinkering in isolation. He was hours away from blowing the whistle on a massive intellectual property heist. For months, his proprietary encryption algorithms had been steadily siphoned off corporate servers and funneled directly to competing defense contractors. The primary financial beneficiary of this high-stakes theft was Marcus Sterling, Arthur's longtime business partner, whose offshore accounts were hemorrhaging red ink before the illegal data leaks began. Comprehensive financial audits recovered directly from Arthur's encrypted vault showed scheduled bank transfers routing massive sums from shadowy shell companies straight to Julian Sterling, a rogue security consultant specializing in custom surveillance optics and psychological manipulation rigs. Arthur had discovered the betrayal and formally scheduled a high-priority meeting with federal prosecutors for the following morning. The motive was no longer a vague professional dispute. It was absolute self-preservation. Sterling desperately needed Arthur silenced before federal agents could examine the shared server architecture. Yet, the physical evidence in the master bathroom suggested that eliminating Arthur required far more than a simple bullet. The killers had meticulously engineered a psychological terror campaign to mask the murder as an internal mental collapse, ensuring that the corporate theft investigation would die alongside the victim. As investigators tracked the financial wire transfers to a downtown Portland bank, a missing piece of hardware emerged from the financial records. For several weeks following the homicide, investigators operated on a clear, straightforward working theory. All financial indicators pointed directly toward Marcus Sterling as the mastermind behind a classic corporate elimination. The missing funds, the compromised server routes, and the direct wire transfers to offshore accounts built an overwhelming circumstantial case. Detectives initially assumed Sterling had personally orchestrated the confrontation inside the rural Oregon estate, cornering Arthur Vance in his own master bathroom before executing the plan. But criminal investigations rarely survive rigorous cross-examination without hitting a brick wall. When technicians pulled the digital data from regional cellular towers and automated toll booth security cameras along the interstate, a glaring contradiction emerged. At the exact window of time when Arthur Vance drew his final breath, Marcus Sterling was logging toll entries 50 miles away in downtown Portland, attending a crowded public board meeting with a dozen verifiable witnesses. The physical presence required to manage a close-quarters homicide was completely absent. Sterling could not have been inside that master bathroom tampering with the custom two-way optical mirror rig while simultaneously swiping his transit pass across a toll gate 50 miles south. The lone perpetrator hypothesis collapsed under the weight of verifiable digital timestamps, confirming beyond doubt that Sterling had not pulled the trigger himself. Instead, he had hired someone else to engineer the psychological torture and carry out the physical execution. The search immediately shifted from a desperate business partner to an unseen professional fixer operating in the shadows. Financial records eventually pointed straight to Julian Sterling as the mastermind behind the mirror rig. But bank statements alone could not place his hands on the optical frame until forensics tested a recovered smudge. Looking closely at the physical evidence recovered from the master bathroom, criminalists focused their attention squarely on the custom two-way optical mirror frame. When the technicians carefully applied aluminum flake powder to the brushed aluminum bezel under intense laboratory lighting, a faint, smudged fingerprint emerged near the bottom corner. This single partial impression did not match Arthur Vance, nor did it belong to his business partner, Marcus Sterling, whose alibi remained airtight 50 miles away. Instead, the ridge patterns matched the biometric profile of Julian Vance, a private security consultant hired months earlier to conduct a routine counter-surveillance sweep of the secluded Oregon estate. Investigators quickly pulled employment records and confirmed that Julian possessed the exact optical calibration tools required to construct the complex 2-second delay rig. The fingerprint placed the security consultant directly on the physical hardware inside the bathroom during the precise installation window, completely bridging the gap between Marcus Sterling's offshore wire transfers and the psychological torture device found at the crime scene. The paper trail and the physical touchpoint finally aligned. transforming an abstract corporate conspiracy into a solvable physical crime with undeniable hard evidence. The remaining question was not how the illusion was built, but where the consultant hid after finishing the setup. Focusing federal surveillance databases on Julian's known vehicle registrations, detectives tracked a late-model utility van to a remote storage facility 20 miles south of the estate. When tactical units executed a search warrant on the concrete unit before dawn, they recovered the specialized lens-calibrating instruments and blueprints matching the mirror rig, leaving the security consultant with no remaining avenues of escape. Looking back at the meticulous physical reconstruction of that night, investigators finally understood how Julian Vance executed the assault without leaving an immediate sign of forced entry. The security consultant had relied on his deep insider access to the estate's floor plans, exploiting the structural blind spot immediately behind the master bathroom vanity. By calibrating the two-way optical mirror rig, Julian created a calculated psychological barrier, delaying Arthur Vance's visual perception by precisely 2 seconds. This deliberate delay induced acute spatial disorientation, making Arthur doubt his own senses as he stared into the polished glass. When the victim stepped closer to investigate the jarring visual anomaly, Julian moved out from the darkened, adjoining service corridor. The physical evidence recovered from the scene confirmed that the fatal blow was delivered swiftly from behind, utilizing the heavy metallic counterbalance of the custom mirror frame itself as an improvised weapon. There was no chaotic struggle, no frantic shouting, and no sign of a desperate defense, because the victim's cognitive focus was entirely consumed by the bizarre reflection delay unfolding before his eyes. The killer then wiped down the brushed aluminum bezel, packed his specialized optical lenses into a weather-sealed utility case, and exited through the unlatched service door leading toward the perimeter tree line. It was a cold, calculated execution disguised as a medical breakdown, engineered down to the exact second. Yet, in his haste to dismantle the optical rig before fleeing the property, the consultant failed to notice a single, crucial smudged friction ridge pressed directly against the lower mounting bracket, sealing his eventual fate. Looking back at the financial records seized from the corporate headquarters, investigators traced the money trail straight to the root of the conspiracy. The offshore wire transfers did not originate from Julian Vance, the rogue security consultant who built the mirror rig. Instead, the funds came directly from Marcus Sterling, Arthur Vance's estranged business partner. The encrypted paper trail established a clear, cold-blooded murder-for-hire contract rather than a random act of psychological torture. Sterling had panicked when federal auditors began closing in on their shared accounts, realizing that Arthur was about to expose their systematic theft of proprietary encryption algorithms. To silence him permanently, Sterling hired Julian to orchestrate an assassination that would look entirely like a medical breakdown, using the two-way optical mirror to shatter Arthur's sanity before delivering the fatal blow. Every piece of physical evidence, from the smudged friction ridge on the aluminum frame to the hidden audio file capturing the second set of footsteps, now pointed to a coordinated corporate execution. The illusion of the delayed reflection was nothing more than a high-tech smokescreen designed to hide a very human, premeditated murder. Furthermore, digital forensics recovered encrypted email threads discussing the exact timing of the audit, confirming that the plot had been in motion for over 3 months. Yet, despite the airtight digital paper trail, the final encrypted archive contained one last disturbing detail. A deleted voice memo recovered from Sterling's personal device suggested that Julian Vance had planned a second target before the federal audit began. Looking back at the cold case files, the convergence happened at precisely 4 o'clock in the morning. Federal agents and local law enforcement executed coordinated tactical raids across 2 distinct locations, effectively dismantling the conspiracy in a single sweep. In the secure underground garage of Marcus Sterling's suburban residence, investigators seized the primary corporate servers containing the mirrored data backups, alongside encrypted thumb drives detailing the offshore financial transfers to Julian Vance. Meanwhile, at the isolated security consultant's rural workshop, a simultaneous breach secured the physical blueprints of the two-way optical mirror rig, complete with structural load calculations and custom glass specifications. The most damning piece of physical evidence, however, was recovered from the trunk of Julian's parked sedan. Resting beneath a stained canvas tarp lay a heavy, oil-streaked steel wrench bearing microscopic traces of paint matching Arthur Vance's study door frame. The chemical analysis confirmed beyond any doubt that the weapon used to deliver the final fatal blow matched the exact second set of footsteps captured on the hidden laptop audio recording. Sterling and Vance were apprehended without offering any physical resistance, their elaborate psychological trap completely unraveled by the physical evidence they left behind at every turn. Furthermore, forensic accountants cross-referenced the seized thumb drives with the corporate ledger, establishing an unbroken chain of custody that tied the financial wire transfers directly to the murder-for-hire contract. Yet, even as both conspirators sat in separate interrogation cells staring down decades of mandatory prison sentences, one final piece of encrypted communication on Sterling's hard drive hinted at an earlier draft of the corporate conspiracy that had been narrowly avoided by pure chance. Ultimately, the meticulous cross-referencing of encrypted data blocks, physical tool marks, and recovered financial records closed every legal loophole, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that corporate greed orchestrated the meticulously planned assassination. Looking back at the final court proceedings, the trial concluded with multiple life sentences without parole, putting a permanent end to a meticulously engineered murder scheme disguised as a haunting. The physical evidence presented in the courtroom left no room for doubt. The custom optical mirror rig, the hidden audio files, and the offshore financial wire transfers formed an unbroken chain of custody that dismantled every defense argument offered by Marcus Sterling and Julian Vance. The corporate espionage and the cold calculation behind the psychological torture weapon were fully laid bare for the jury to examine. As the heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary closed behind the conspirators, the dark chapter of corporate greed finally drew to a definitive close. Yet, the case files stored deep within our archive remind us just how far corruption can twist human ingenuity when left unchecked, leaving behind a stark warning about the lengths to which desperate men will go to protect their illicit fortunes. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the darkest corners of human behavior and forensic detection. If you want to uncover more cold cases with us, make sure to subscribe to the Blackwood Files. Looking back at the empty courtroom and the archived evidence lockers, this investigation remains a stark reminder that even the most elaborate schemes eventually collapse under the weight of physical proof. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the darkest corners of human behavior. If you want to uncover more cold cases with us, make sure to subscribe to the Blackwood Files.